So yeah, when I said it was a pretty good sized stencil, that was what I meant by a pretty good sized stencil. My back is far bigger than you think.
Damn.
Yep. And hopefully what'll happen is the kanji will tuck in somewhere up in here and somewhere down in there and just, you know, just kind of flow nice with it like we planned it or something. So we're going to use some product called stencil stuff, because when I'm working with this much outline that I don't want to lose, you know, while I'm working and spraying it and wiping it down, I find that this particular product holds the stencil on quite a bit longer than if I were to just spray it with green soap. Started using it about 1.5 years ago, and on all of my bigger tattoos I use it, obviously. Some of the smaller ones I still get lazy and just spray some green soap and stick it on there for a name or a kanji symbol or something. But if I'm really, there's some work that I have to make sure that I keep a good grasp on my stencil. Stencil stuff is the route that I go.
That's the stuff, baby.
So what I'm doing is I'm taking that center line and I'm trying to run it right down the spine. And then I'm going to radiate out from the center in hopes that we hit. And see, it's a little tough with the larger stencils because, again, a body has contours, and typically whatever you made your stencil on is relatively flat. And so it kind of has sometimes you get a little issue of it being able to fall into the contours. It's looking like it's working pretty good here so far. So far, so good.
Yep, the idea of laying it down definitely is working.
Not to move too much just yet. Let's see, did that actually take long enough either?
Oh my god.
It's like waxing, but more pleasant.
Oh my god, it's so weird.
Oh man.
Wow.
Kapling! So, what I think I'm going to do here, in the painting that we're going to be working on, there's a lot of dark contrasting with a lot of light. So I think I'm going to end up doing a nice crisp outline on a lot of this with really some actual black ink. Then I'm going to go in on the crane and I'll knock the outline out, but I think I'm going to use a number 2 from Silverback because it kind of, as it heals up, it's almost like a permanent bloodline. And it'll give me the opportunity to be able to go back in at a later date without having to match stencils up and try to figure out what we were supposed to do with it and whatever. And hopefully we can get all of the outline done in this first sitting here, and then, you know, as time permits, we can just go back in with the shading. So I believe for my jet black, I'm going to be using some Talons. It's my old standby that I've been using for years and years and years and years. Been around forever. So I'm very familiar with how it holds up in skin over time. Silverback is definitely something I've been experimenting quite a bit with recently, and I find that it really does kind of help out as far as being consistent with your grayer washes and your lighter outlines. So we'll be using that. We're going to start out with super tight round 5. Needle came from Cam Manufacturing. I tend to like the super tights with my liners. You know, something like the way that this painting is set up, you don't really see a lot of bold, aggressive outlines. And though a 5 is a pretty standard outline for a little arm, bicep kind of a piece, on a back, when you compare it to how much area we're going to cover, it should be a relatively fine looking line in comparison. I'll go back in the featherwork and stuff, and I'll throw a tight 3 in there.
I'm kind of
Look at
that.
This finger wrap is just so that I don't have to stop to wipe off a lot of the ink as often. I actually stole that from a man named Jeff Jeffers when I was apprenticing back when I was a teenager in a custom image in South Charleston, West Virginia. Toomey was actually the guy that I was apprenticing under. His name was Toomey Stewart. I actually still go back and talk to him occasionally. But Jeff Jeffers had a couple of little kind of wicked tricks that I stole from him, and this finger wrap was one of them. What we can get started on, this branch over here looks like a good area because it's close to me, and she's not really going to like me very much. Just bear in mind that whining is okay, noise doesn't hurt anything. Movement, on the other hand, is the enemy. So you're complaining about the hip when you thought the ribs were going to be what was going to hurt you more. And people do that. That's why when they try to ask, well, what part is going to hurt more? You can't really tell because it really is different for each person. Like, you know what I mean? Where it hurts more for me may not be the same place. That you know, I can hit a spot on myself and it may barely be felt. And you get on somebody else and it's excruciating. Or you could, you know, could be a moderate sort of feel on one person and the other person not really feel it at all. I mean, just, it really is a very individual thing as far as what it's going to feel like in certain spots. And I mean, you may only need an extra inch or two for it to make a huge difference. It may not be a really, you know, it might not be like, you know, top left versus bottom right. It could be an inch or two, and it could be an extreme difference in what it feels like, and it does vary from person to person. One thing you'll notice about me is that I really don't mind working messy. You know what I mean? Like all this excess ink over here, I'm only really focused on what I'm trying to push in there anyway. And we'll worry about the cleanup later. You know, I want to get it in there right on the first try. I don't want to really be playing around too much. So if I have excess ink, then that's just something that I gotta deal with. Obviously, if it starts to block my view of what I'm trying to do, then I'll wipe it off. But I don't get real anal about whether or not there's bleed over on the ink or whatever. As long as I'm not blowing lines or whatever, it's all good to me. See, I don't even want you to see the first tattoo that I put on her when you compare it to what this is.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest friggin' jump out.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing there.
We might actually have to compare that.
I go big.
I actually probably like this a little better. That doesn't tend to be as intense for most people. And so you end up being not just an artist or a technician with your equipment, but you also get stuck being a counselor, a psychologist, you know what I mean, a therapist. You know, it's like sitting in the barber shop and you got to hear everybody's problems, because once you get an hour or two in and some pain, stuff start coming out like the torture chamber in Iraq, you know what I mean?
Can you hold my hand?
No,
Oh, okay.
after you're done outlining these leaves, or whatever you're doing, I just cigarette.
Breaks tend to go 10 minutes at each hour, because otherwise you'll be a cigarette smoking fiend, and every 15 minutes you'll want to get up. And just so that you know, when you get up, when you actually get back into it, it's worse than before you left.
Great, fantastic.
No, really, it's like that, because what your body is doing right now is it's forming its own defense against the shock of the injury, which is what we're really doing. And so your adrenaline, endorphin, dopamine, all of that is on high, full tilt kind of thing right now. When you stop and you're not receiving the energy anymore, or the injury anymore, the mind goes, okay, well, the injury part is over. We don't have to produce as much of that. And then when you get back into it, for the first, you know, couple minutes, it's actually a little worse than when you left off, and then it kind of settles back in. Alrighty, so let's wipe this down for our first hour break. We did seem to have accomplished quite a bit in that first hour.
Oh, this is so good.
We still have the feathers and the top crane to do.
Oh.
Up through here, where the feathers would be white. And then I'm going to go in with an even lighter wash and just sort of outline the shape of the kind of misty, smoky background. That way when we go back in and actually shade it, the shading will be darker than the outline stuff that we put on it. And it'll kind of eliminate that from sight. Yep, so, I mean, still trying to, like, kind of, I guess, map in what the background is going to be. So I'm moving the machine pretty fast, going with a pretty light gray wash, so that as this heals up, you see less and less of the actual lines and stuff. That way when we shade it in, it should fall right into a nice, misty, smoky feel. But I do want to keep the floor plan together, if you will, so I want to make sure I get in there with this. It's kind of strange because you know, it's a pretty traditional Asian style piece, but I'm approaching it with a super tight 5 and a super tight 3 over a full back. So, you know, you see a lot of 8 and 9 rounds in like an arm piece for this kind of thing. So An hour and 45 minutes in, and it looks like we have completed the entire outline.
Is it that funny?
Oh, really? 45 minutes already?
An hour and 45 is what the clock says. How much was actually in skin and how much was, you know. But yeah, I mean, the time consumption, we've only had you down here an hour and 45 minutes, so
Yeah.
it's gonna suck a little bit because I got to scrub all this like excess black ink off of here that I kind of left behind on purpose so that I could just continue through the piece. So I'm sure, like with the camera, you can probably see the difference between this kind of line, these lines here, and then what you have going on here. And so, you know, even just using 2 needle groupings, you get several different consistencies of line work out of that. When it shows up in the finished product, what we're hoping is that it gives a different effect for each section of it. The black stuff is gonna be a little bit more intense, a little bit crisper, sharper. The stuff that's gonna be white, where the main thing is white, it obviously will be a little softer, and then softer yet on the background where it's supposed to be smoky, misty kind of stuff. But that's looking like that is about it.